Decades before history caught up, Edgar Cayce described World War II, the crash of the stock market in 1929, the rise of Hitler, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and even the splitting of the atom, long before science could explain it. At the time, many dismissed him. Today, his record speaks for itself. Across the United States, the signs are no longer subtle. Millions are being deported in the U.S., a nation quietly transforming in ways few expected. Are we witnessing the beginning of an end-time prophecy unfolding in America? The massive collapse in the United States. To understand why what is happening in America today feels so intense, we have to go back to a moment when the country felt almost invincible. In 1925, the United States was living at the height of the Roaring Twenties. The economy was booming, money was flowing, and experts confidently claimed the good times would never end. But while the world was celebrating, Edgar Cayce, lying unconscious in trance, saw something entirely different. He described a violent financial collapse, blood in the streets of Wall Street, and a sudden end to the illusion of endless prosperity. At the time, it sounded extreme, even absurd. Yet just 4 years later, in 1929, the stock market crumbled, banks failed, and the Great Depression swept across the nation exactly as Cayce had foreseen. That moment alone forced people to reconsider whether his visions were coincidence or something far more unsettling. As the world moved into the 1,930 seconds, desperately hoping for peace and recovery, Cayce again warned that darker forces were gathering. He spoke of new alliances forming in Europe, of a man rising to power in Germany, and of a global war that would begin in the early 1,940 seconds and end in 1945. Every major detail he gave about World War II, including its timing, later proved accurate. Even more disturbing was his vision of technological breakthroughs far beyond his era. He described the hidden energy inside the atom and warned that humanity would turn it into weapons capable of unimaginable destruction, long before nuclear energy was publicly known. He even mentioned the use of lasers, a concept that sounded like pure science fiction in the 1,930 seconds. Again and again, history moved exactly where Cayce said it would. Now fast forward to our time, as 2026 approaches, and America finds itself in another moment of violent tension, not just economically or politically, but socially and spiritually. Communities are fractured, trust in institutions is fading, and fear has become a constant background noise. In the middle of this unrest, millions are being deported in the U.S. It is a sign of deep instability, families being separated, lives uprooted, and a nation wrestling with its own identity. Cayce warned that when societies reach a certain point of imbalance, the pressure does not release gently. It breaks suddenly, often through events that force people to confront truths they have long ignored. According to Cayce, there would come a time when the earth would stop whispering and begin speaking, when small warnings would give way to violent transformation. He said the planet itself, overwhelmed by human greed, war, and spiritual blindness, would begin to shift in ways we could no longer explain away or ignore. That moment, he warned, would mark a tipping point, not just politically or environmentally, but spiritually. And in Cayce's vision, 2026 stands precisely at that threshold. It is the moment when the old world begins to fall away, when systems built on excess, fear, and separation start to collapse, and when a new earth slowly begins to rise. Not without pain, not without loss, but with the possibility of renewal for those willing to see what this moment is truly asking of us: the cleanse to survive. Edgar Cayce did not describe the changes ahead as random disasters or acts of punishment. He called them a great shift, a cleansing, a deep process of transformation that would test every soul on earth. In his vision, cities would fall and waters would rise. But beneath the visible chaos, something far more important would be taking place. Humanity itself would be awakened. What we are witnessing is not just destruction on the surface, but a necessary shaking, meant to reveal what has been buried for too long. As we move closer to 2026, the signs Cayce described are no longer distant or symbolic. Waves of migrants being pushed back, borders tightening, social systems fracturing, and communities turning against one another are happening in real time. At the same time, the planet itself is reacting. Magnetic shifts are increasing, volcanic activity is becoming more intense, and weather patterns are growing more extreme and unpredictable. The Earth is no longer whispering, the climate is no longer subtle, and perhaps most importantly, the human soul is no longer asleep. Cayce saw this moment clearly, and his prophecy was never meant to spread fear. It was a warning meant to awaken those who are willing to listen. To understand this, we have to understand how Edgar Cayce viewed the Earth itself. He never saw the planet as a lifeless rock floating through space. To him, the Earth was a living, breathing being, a conscious presence that feels, remembers, and responds. This idea may sound mystical, but Cayce spoke about it with calm clarity. Just as the human body absorbs both nourishment and poison, the Earth absorbs energy, both positive and negative. And when that energy becomes toxic, the Earth, like any living organism, must cleanse itself in order to survive. Cayce warned that humanity's actions, especially war, greed, cruelty, and the ongoing disrespect for nature, create a buildup of spiritual waste. These are not just moral failures or political problems. They leave energetic imprints. They generate real vibrations that disturb the inner balance of the planet. When that burden becomes too heavy, the Earth responds not with anger or revenge, but with necessity. Earthquakes, volcanoes, violent storms, and shifting lands are not punishments from above. They are the Earth's way of healing itself. By 2025, we have already seen signs that align closely with Cayce's warnings. Extreme weather patterns are appearing in places once considered safe. Droughts arrive where rain should be abundant. Hurricanes form where they were once rare. Wildfires move with unnatural speed, overwhelming entire regions before people can react. Scientists continue to search for explanations, but to Cayce, these events were not coincidences or climate accidents. They were symptoms of a living Earth under stress, signals that the imbalance has reached a critical point, and that more is coming if humanity does not realign itself with the natural order. Cayce taught that human beings are not separate from the planet. We are cells in the body of the Earth. When we live in harmony, the Earth flourishes, and so do we. But when we poison ourselves with hatred, division, exploitation, and endless consumption, the entire body suffers, including every one of us. We are not being punished, we are being reminded. The Earth is calling for help, and according to Cayce, it is not too late to answer that call. But doing so requires a shift in how we see the world, not as something to dominate or own, but as a sacred being trying to survive, just like us. It will reap what it sows. Edgar Cayce warned that the changes coming to the Earth would never strike at random. They would move with precision, touching the places where power had been abused, where people were enslaved, where nature was exploited, and where material wealth was pursued at the expense of the soul. He said that a nation, just like an individual, will always reap what it sows. This idea sounds simple, almost biblical, but when applied to history, it becomes deeply unsettling. Because when we look honestly at the dominant empires of our time, we begin to see the same repeating patterns of control, dominance, and spiritual blindness. The United States, for example, has stood at the center of global finance, technology, and warfare for decades. Its influence has shaped economies, borders, and even belief systems around the world. Cayce's readings point to this region not as a target of punishment, but as a focal point of energetic rebalancing. The same principle applies to parts of Europe, lands that carry long histories of conquest, colonization, and cultural pride. These are not political accusations or modern opinions. They are spiritual observations from a man who claimed to see beyond time and beyond surface-level events. According to Cayce, the Earth itself is not cruel, it does not seek revenge, it is just. It responds to collective human energy, the way a tree bends under growing pressure. The more imbalance that builds, the more dramatic the correction must become. This helps explain why regions considered advanced, stable, and powerful now find themselves at the center of accelerating change. The soil remembers what happened upon it. The oceans remember what was taken from them. And when enough pain, pride, and unresolved energy collect in one place, the earth moves to restore balance, not through hatred, but through truth. Among all of Edgar Cayce's visions, few are as haunting or as misunderstood as his prophecy of Atlantis. He did not describe Atlantis as a myth or a fantasy. He described it as memory, a memory buried deep within the human soul. Cayce claimed that many of the souls living on Earth today, especially in the Western world, are reincarnations of those who once lived in Atlantis. They have returned not by coincidence, but to face the very test they once failed. In his readings, Cayce described Atlantis as a highly advanced civilization that existed tens of thousands of years ago. Its people possessed extraordinary technology, powerful energy systems, and a deep understanding of spiritual forces. But over time, something shifted. They began to misuse energy. They played with forces they did not fully understand. Greed slowly replaced wisdom, and power was used to dominate rather than to serve. The result was catastrophic. The continent collapsed and was swallowed by the sea, erased almost entirely from the physical world. Now, Cayce said, those same souls have returned, and once again, they find themselves surrounded by familiar conditions: advanced technology, artificial intelligence, nuclear power, genetic manipulation, energy sources beyond our full control. And once again, we see social upheaval, fear, division, and millions are being deported as systems struggle to hold together. The stage feels eerily familiar. Humanity is standing before the same choice it once faced: use power to heal, or use it to dominate. The question Cayce leaves us with is simple, but uncomfortable. Have we learned anything? Cayce believed that history does not move in a straight line. It moves in a spiral. Events return not to punish humanity, but to offer another chance. The earth changes he described are not just about shifting continents or collapsing systems. They are about us. They are a final exam for the human soul. If we repeat the same mistakes, the same pride, the same spiritual blindness, the earth will respond just as it did before. But if we rise, if we awaken to our higher nature, this cycle does not have to end in destruction. This time, the fall of the old world can become the birth of something sacred, the big one. For years, scientists have warned about what they call the big one, a massive earthquake expected to strike the west coast of the United States. Most of these warnings focus on fault lines, pressure points, and statistical models. But what Edgar Cayce saw went far beyond geology. While in a trance state, he didn't describe a single quake. He described the land itself breaking apart. In his visions, California did not simply shake. It split, it sank, and parts of it returned to the sea. He spoke of cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco being destroyed before New York, not as symbols, but as literal locations in a reshaping world. The question, of course, is why California? According to Cayce, the answer goes deeper than tectonic plates. He believed the West Coast rests on the remnants of Lemuria, an ancient Pacific continent rich with spiritual energy. This land, he said, carries memories that are powerful, sacred, and deeply sensitive. But modern civilization has ignored that history. Today, California stands as a global symbol of materialism, image obsession, and surface-level culture. Cayce warned that when a land's spiritual past is completely disconnected from its present reality, pressure builds over time, and eventually, the earth responds. Cayce also gave a very specific sign to watch for. He said that increased volcanic activity in the eastern hemisphere, particularly eruptions from Mount Vesuvius or Mount Pelée, would signal that Southern California and the land stretching between Salt Lake City and Nevada could experience a major earthquake within 3 months. As we move through 2025, the entire Ring of Fire, the massive tectonic belt surrounding the Pacific Ocean, is showing heightened activity. For those who study these patterns, the indicators are flashing red. But Cayce never shared these visions to create panic. He did not encourage people to run in fear or live in constant anxiety. His message was about awareness. It was about learning to listen to the land. The West Coast holds immense beauty, history, and creative energy, but it also carries deep tension, spiritual, energetic, and geological. And Cayce's warning was clear. When that tension finally breaks, the change will not be temporary, it will be permanent. While the West Coast, in Cayce's vision, faces a slow and grinding transformation, his warnings for the East Coast were very different. They were sudden, sweeping, and devastating. He specifically pointed to New York, Connecticut, and nearby regions. These were not vague or symbolic references. Cayce described land disappearing, coastlines receding, and cities vanishing in what he called the twinkling of an eye. That phrase matters. It implies speed. It suggests that these changes would not unfold gradually, but would happen so fast that there would be no time to react. New York, in Cayce's view, was more than just a city. It was a symbol of financial dominance, media control, and political power. For over a century, it has represented the peak of Western civilization's material success. Cayce believed that places built on ego, exploitation, and disconnection from spiritual laws of balance would find themselves directly in the path of the Earth's correction. This was not divine punishment. It was energetic rebalancing. He also spoke of a coming pole shift, a movement of the Earth's crust over its core. Today, scientists might call this crustal displacement. In Cayce's understanding, it was the response of a living planet trying to realign itself after centuries of imbalance. When this shift occurs, water would move violently, reshaping coastlines almost instantly. In that context, New York, sitting at the edge of the Atlantic, becomes a kind of karmic epicenter, vulnerable not only because of its geography, but because of its energetic weight in the spiritual story of the modern world. Cayce believed the Earth remembers everything, and when the moment of reckoning arrives, even the tallest skyscrapers cannot stand against the tide. The East Coast, he warned, would not just lose land, it could lose its identity, and in that loss, painful as it may be, something new may finally be born. The prediction is out of America. Edgar Cayce's warnings were never limited to the United States. In his readings, his vision stretched far beyond America, crossing the Atlantic and revealing a future for Europe that few people today are truly ready to face. He spoke of a continent standing on the edge of radical transformation, not slowly over centuries, but suddenly, as part of a global shift affecting the entire planet. Cayce described a time when the northern regions of Europe would begin to sink, while new land masses would rise in the south. To many people, especially in the early 20th century, this sounded impossible, almost absurd. But now, as we approach the closing days of 2025, those words no longer feel like fantasy. The signs are everywhere. Scandinavia, the United Kingdom, and other northern countries are already experiencing unusual and extreme changes, not as isolated events, but as part of something much larger. He warned that the melting of the polar ice would destabilize the balance of the Earth itself. When that massive weight shifts, the planet responds. Today, scientists openly acknowledge that both the Arctic and Antarctic are melting at alarming rates, and as that meltwater moves, it does more than raise sea levels. It redistributes the Earth's mass, subtly but powerfully influencing the movement of the planet's crust. What Cayce described nearly a century ago is now being discussed in modern scientific language. At the same time, Cayce spoke of land rising in the southern parts of Europe and even off the east coast of the United States. This wasn't random destruction. It was rebalancing. But more than changes in soil and stone, Cayce was pointing to something deeper. He was mapping a spiritual transformation, one where old centers of power collapse and forgotten lands return to prominence. The cities we now call capitals may not survive in their current form. The economic systems people depend on may dissolve. What feels stable today could vanish in the twinkling of an eye, exactly as Cayce often warned. Europe, a continent that once ruled empires and shaped the modern world, may find itself humbled, reshaped, and return to a quieter, more ancient rhythm. The Earth, Cayce believed, is redrawing her map, not just geographically, but purposefully. And for Europe, the future will not look like the past. Yet in the middle of all these warnings and visions of collapse, Edgar Cayce offered something rare, something most prophets never do. He offered hope, grounded in geography. While the coasts would fracture and sink, he spoke clearly about regions that would remain stable, even thrive, during and after the Earth changes. These areas were not chosen by chance. They were chosen because of their deep geological foundations and their relative spiritual neutrality. Cayce called them the safe zones, the granaries of the future. According to his readings, the interior of the United States and Canada would hold strong. States like Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, places often overlooked in the rush of modern culture, would become new centers of life. These lands sit on the North American Craton, the oldest and most stable rock base on the continent. While the outer edges of the continent shake and fall away, the interior stands firm, like the spine of a great body. But Cayce's vision was never only about rocks and fault lines. It was deeply spiritual. These regions were safer not just because of geology, but because they had not become centers of extreme materialism or corruption. They remained more humble, more grounded, more connected to the natural rhythm of the earth. Cayce saw them becoming centers of food production, rebuilding, and healing, quiet hearts from which a new world could grow. He even extended this vision into parts of southern Canada, again emphasizing that spiritual simplicity, not technological arrogance, would offer a kind of energetic protection. Still, Cayce never suggested that these zones would be untouched or easy places to live. He said they would be resilient, guided, and chosen, not simply for safety, but for responsibility. Those who find themselves there are not lucky, they are needed. Because the work of healing and planting the new earth has to begin somewhere, and it will begin where the earth still breathes in peace. Among all of Edgar Cayce's prophecies, few shocked people more than his vision of Russia. At a time when the world viewed Russia through fear, suspicion, and conflict, Cayce saw something entirely different. He called Russia the hope of the world, not because of its politics or power, but because of its spiritual potential. In reading 3,976-29, he said that out of Russia would come a new kind of freedom, not rooted in governments or flags, but in brotherhood, compassion, and service to others. He warned that this transformation would not happen quickly. It would be born through suffering and would only emerge after the collapse of the material systems that had dominated the world. To many, this sounded impossible. How could a nation shaped by hardship and conflict become a beacon of light? But Cayce wasn't speaking about headlines or regimes. He was speaking about the soul of the land and the people shaped by fire. He believed that after enduring immense loss, Russia would emerge purified, ready to lead not with dominance, but with humility. In contrast, Cayce warned that the West, especially America, faced collapse under the weight of its own excess. Debt, greed, moral decay, these were the spiritual poisons he saw eating away at modern Western culture. He believed a reversal was coming. The old centers of power would fall, and places once dismissed as weak would rise, precisely because they had learned, through pain, how to live for one another. Cayce never claimed Russia was perfect. He saw it as prepared by history, hardship, and destiny, a sleeping giant not of military strength, but of spiritual light, ready to stand when others lose their way. When people hear about earthquakes, floods, and maps being redrawn, the first response is almost always fear. It rises fast and overwhelming. The mind begins to race, asking where to go, what to buy, how to escape. This reaction is natural. It is the survival instinct. But Edgar Cayce was very clear about one thing. No physical preparation can truly protect a soul vibrating in fear. He taught that safety does not come from walls, bunkers, or supplies. It comes from frequency. Fear lowers your vibration and pulls your energy into chaos, and chaos becomes a magnet for destruction. A person could be sitting deep underground in the most secure place on earth, surrounded by stockpiles, yet still be unprotected if their heart is filled with panic. Cayce repeated this law throughout his readings. Spirit is the life. Mind is the builder. The physical world is the result. In simple terms, our thoughts and emotions shape our reality. Fear attracts danger, peace attracts guidance, and in the most urgent moments of earth change, those aligned with light will not need to run. They will be led, warning of spiritual collapse. Cayce's warnings reached beyond cracked asphalt and collapsing piers. He described a collapse of faith that would accompany any great geological rupture, a period when hope itself would feel as unstable as the ground beneath people's feet. In his view, the shaking of the earth and the shaking of human trust were two expressions of the same fracture. Physical destruction would expose spiritual fractures, and as towns and systems failed, many hearts would falter, leaving people confused, fearful, and profoundly isolated. Those who listened to Cayce heard more than imagery of broken roads. They heard a diagnosis of a society at risk of moral exhaustion. He pointed to small quakes, unusual subterranean movements, and accelerating environmental signs as early warnings, symptoms that, in his vision, would precede a far larger rupture. Once the first great break began in the South, he taught, the process would not stop. Stress would cascade along linked fault lines, and the resulting chaos would overwhelm ordinary mechanisms of comfort and control. Without warning systems that functioned or institutions capable of quick, humane responses, despair could spread as quickly as the water. What Cayce really wanted to say is when familiar places are lost, the social and spiritual scaffolding people rely on can dissolve with them. He imagined families uprooted in an instant, communities separated by new waterways, and entire neighborhoods rendered memory-scarred islands of loss. The sea he described did not arrive as a gentle tide, but as a rushing, violent force that erased the border between land and life, leaving survivors to grapple with grief, disorientation, and the difficult work of meaning-making. The consequences he sketched extended well beyond immediate suffering. Economic systems would falter, supply chains would break, and lines of communication that tie a functioning society together could be severed. Ports and highways, financial centers, and hubs of governance would face paralysis, and with that paralysis would come cascading shortages, insecure shelter, and the collapse of routine medical and social services. In such a scenario, fear would not be an abstract emotion, but a practical threat to survival, and spiritual resilience would become as vital as food, water, and shelter. Yet Cayce framed this bleak prospect with a purpose. The catastrophe was also a test, an opportunity for renewal. He insisted that the collapse of institutions could be the crucible that forces people to confront priorities, abandon selfish systems, and rebuild toward humility and community. In his vision, the spiritual reckoning called for more than prayer. It required solidarity, the revival of neighborly bonds, and a reorientation away from materialism and toward values that sustain collective life. This emphasis on moral recovery shaped the practical implications Cayce offered. Preparation, he argued, had to work on two levels simultaneously: tangible readiness through supplies, safe locations, and community planning, and inward readiness through faith, humility, and a willingness to serve others. The two strands, physical and spiritual, reinforce each other. Communities with strong networks of mutual aid and shared moral purpose are more likely to withstand shock, coordinate relief, and preserve hope when infrastructure falters. Unexpected guidance, In some of his most powerful and revealing readings, Edgar Cayce spoke about something that even modern science still struggles to explain, a truth that quietly overturns everything we think we know about survival. He said that in times of great crisis, certain people would be guided to safety without fully understanding why. There would be no dramatic warning, no clear voice telling them what to do. Instead, it would come as a feeling, a sudden inner nudge to leave a place, to change plans, to take a different path. Someone might miss a flight, get delayed by what feels like bad luck, or accept a job offer in another city, only to later realize that those small moments saved their life. Cayce called this divine guidance, and he was very clear that it had nothing to do with luck or coincidence. The key, he said, was vibration. Every person radiates a frequency, a kind of spiritual signal created by their thoughts, emotions, and daily choices. When someone lives in constant fear, anger, or desperation, they send out one kind of signal. When someone lives in love, peace, faith, and compassion, they send out another. And the earth itself, which Cayce described as a conscious living being, responds to those signals. According to Cayce, when a soul is aligned with the light, it becomes almost invisible to destruction. Not because that person is better than others, but because their energy simply does not match the chaos around them. In spiritual law, like attracts like. A soul vibrating in fear naturally draws situations that reflect fear. A soul vibrating in harmony is moved, protected, and sometimes even relocated by forces we cannot see, not through magic, but through alignment. This understanding helps explain why some people survive the impossible. It isn't always about being in the right place geographically. Often, it's about being in the right inner state at the moment of crisis. Cayce urged people not to panic, not to hoard, and not to run blindly in fear. Instead, he encouraged cultivating inner peace, prayer, service, and a deep connection to the divine. When the earth trembles, when waters rise, and when systems begin to collapse, he said, "Your true shelter will not be concrete walls or underground bunkers. It will be your consciousness." Those who understand this truth often discover that they are exactly where they need to be, at exactly the right time, even when it doesn't make sense at first. After all the warnings, all the signs, and all the shaking of the world, Edgar Cayce offered one final truth, a truth that changes how we see everything. This moment in history is not about destruction. It is about transformation. The earth is not dying. She is preparing to be reborn. And those who feel drawn to this moment, those who are still listening, still watching, still searching for meaning, are not here by accident. You are not a victim of this timeline. You are a volunteer. You came here for a reason. Cayce believed that many of the souls incarnated today, especially in the Western world, carry within them the memory of Atlantis. They have lived through the rise and fall of advanced civilizations before. They remember what happens when power is abused, when nature is ignored, and when greed replaces wisdom. And long ago, they made a vow to return and do it differently this time. That time is now. The year 2026 is not simply the end of an old system. It marks the beginning of a new earth, one that must be planted, nurtured, and carefully grown. Cayce was clear about this. The earth needs gardeners, souls willing to hold the light while the darkness collapses, souls who remain centered, grounded, and faithful, not because they are fearless, but because they trust the divine plan unfolding beneath the chaos. The earth is changing her skin, and she is waiting for you to take your place in the garden of the new world, the second coming. Edgar Cayce's predictions about the second coming of Christ are among his most intriguing and controversial. Cayce, a devout Christian, believed that the return of Christ would be a pivotal event in human history, marking the end of an age of materialism and the beginning of a new era of spiritual awakening. Cayce suggested that the second coming would occur sometime soon. He did not give a specific date, but indicated that it would happen during a period of great global upheaval and change. According to Cayce, the period preceding the Second Coming would be marked by widespread chaos, conflict, and natural disasters. He predicted wars, economic collapse, and social unrest on a global scale, as well as an increase in earthquakes, hurricanes, and other catastrophic events. Cayce believed that the global turmoil would serve as a catalyst for a profound spiritual awakening. He predicted that people would turn away from materialism and seek a deeper connection with the divine, leading to a renewed interest in spirituality and a desire for inner peace. Cayce's visions of the Second Coming described Christ returning not as a physical being, but as a spiritual presence that would manifest in the hearts and minds of people all over the world. He believed that this presence would guide humanity toward a new era of love, compassion, and unity. Cayce predicted that the Second Coming would lead to the establishment of a new world order based on spiritual principles. He envisioned a global society founded on cooperation, equality, and the recognition of the interconnectedness of all life. Cayce emphasized the importance of individual spiritual growth and transformation in preparing for the Second Coming. He believed that each person had a role to play in ushering in the new era, and that personal spiritual development was essential to the collective awakening of humanity. Decades before Donald Trump was even born, a man known as the Sleeping Prophet had already seen the events that would surround him in 2026. It sounds unbelievable, but Edgar Cayce, a humble man from Kentucky, made predictions so detailed and strange that many of them later came true. From global conflicts to the shifting fate of nations, Cayce's visions often read like a coded roadmap of the future. Now, people shocked when realize what he points straight toward America, and yes, to Trump himself. The unexpected return. In one of his most mysterious readings, Edgar Cayce spoke of a return, especially the re-emergence of a controversial figure whose actions would shake America to its core. He pointed directly to the year 2026, calling it a time of reckoning, a year when the nation would be forced to confront the truth about itself and its leaders. What makes this so fascinating is how closely his words seem to mirror the growing speculation surrounding Donald Trump and his potential second term. Cayce described this figure as a builder, a man associated with towers, gold, and grand visions of restoring greatness. He said this leader would rise again, determined to rebuild what he believed was lost, but would soon face an unprecedented trial that would test not only his power, but the moral foundation of the country itself. Cayce described a moment, maybe in 2026, when a leader who had once been adored, then cast aside, would return to power. He warned of towers collapsing, not only as physical symbols, but as metaphors for the fall of influence, the crumbling of authority, and the loss of trust in once powerful institutions. According to Cayce, this comeback would not restore peace as many hoped. Instead, it would spark a crisis that would reveal the true state of America's soul, a reckoning between illusion and truth. Researchers who have analyzed Cayce's astrological references point out that several rare planetary alignments will converge in late 2026, marking what Cayce described as a point of no return. These alignments, historically linked to the fall of overreaching empires and leaders blinded by ambition, seem to echo his warning. Whether one sees it as prophecy or coincidence, the parallels are hard to ignore. If Cayce was right, 2026 won't just be another election year. It will be the year when America decides whether to rebuild its foundation on truth or watch the towers of illusion come crashing down once again. 3. Major crisis. Cayce said that this contentious leader would regain power. However, his second term would be characterized by 3 major crises. The first crisis, he said, would be economic, a sudden collapse that would shake global markets to their core. Cayce referred to it as the disintegration of false foundations, describing a system built on speculation, debt, and illusion, finally crumbling under its own weight. What's striking is how precisely this mirrors the current global tension, trade disputes, inflation, and the unraveling of international alliances. Cayce hinted that this collapse would not come from external enemies, but from within, triggered by policies intended to restore strength, yet leading to instability instead. Many now connect this to Trump's economic policy, tariffs, trade renegotiations, and the attempt to pull America back from global dependence. The second crisis Cayce described was environmental. He spoke of rising waters, extreme storms, and the sea reclaiming what humanity had built. He warned that these events would be both natural and man-made, nature responding to human negligence. In his view, the earth itself would react to the choices of those in power. He specifically pointed to the eastern coast of the United States as an area of great change, with flooding and coastal destruction signaling a world out of balance. Let's consider Trump's past stance on environmental issues, his withdrawal from international climate agreements, and emphasis on deregulation. It might fit to Cayce's prophecy. With the third crisis, he foresaw a constitutional crisis, an internal reckoning that would challenge the very framework of American democracy. Cayce envisioned a moment when the nation's institutions would collide, when the balance between power and principle would be pushed to its breaking point. He spoke of a leader who would resist the limits placed upon him, creating a division so deep that Americans would be forced to choose between order and freedom. Cayce repeatedly used the term civil strife to describe this period, suggesting unrest that would not just be political, but spiritual in nature, a test of the nation's soul. What is behind 2026 prediction? What makes Cayce's 2026 prediction so striking isn't just the accuracy of his past readings, it's the depth and consistency of his message. Statistical analyses of his thousands of recorded sessions show that too many of his forecasts proved correct for them to be dismissed as mere coincidence. So, when he made specific remarks about America in the 2022s, researchers began paying closer attention, and among all those readings, the one tied to 2026 stands out as one of his most detailed and symbolically rich. In a 1938 session recorded as reading 602-3, Cayce was asked about the future of democracy. His response was both prophetic and unsettling. He said that America would face a crucial crossroads in the mid-2022s, a time when the nation would have to decide whether to move forward with a higher, more awakened consciousness, or slide backward into old cycles of control and division. What caught many scholars' attention was his repeated reference to the number 26, a number that appears again and again in his writings about the United States. It wasn't a random figure. Cayce used numbers as symbolic anchors, and 26 seemed to represent a moment of testing, a turning point in which the soul of a nation would be revealed. Cayce often spoke in symbols and metaphors, but his stenographers recorded his words carefully. He talked about cycles of leadership, karma, and return. Cayce explained that certain souls, what he called returning souls of leadership, come back across lifetimes to finish the work they once began. These individuals, he said, often appear during periods of upheaval. They are divisive figures, both admired and condemned, because their purpose is to bring hidden truths to the surface. In one reading, Cayce said that America's greatest trials would be tied to one of these returning souls, someone who had once held great power, lost it, and returned again to face his unfinished destiny. When we compare that to Donald Trump's political journey, the meteoric rise, the dramatic fall, and his determined re-emergence, it's difficult not to see the parallels. He didn't just talk about personal karma, he warned about national karma. As a man sows, so must a nation reap, he said. In his view, entire civilizations, like individuals, go through cycles of learning, decline, and renewal. America, he believed, was entering its own period of reckoning, a time when greed, corruption, and moral decay would come face to face with the consequences of their own making. Just as ancient empires had fallen when they strayed too far from spiritual truth, Cayce suggested that modern America would reach a similar point of reflection. To him, 2026 wasn't just a date, it was a mirror year, one that would reveal whether the nation could rise to a higher consciousness or collapse under the weight of its unlearned lessons. And at the heart of that mirror, he hinted, would stand a returning soul, one whose rise and trials would symbolize the deeper struggle within America itself. A real storm. Among his most haunting prophecies was one he gave near the end of his life, a vision of a massive storm forming over the Atlantic Ocean, stretching across the eastern coast of the United States. He called it not just a storm of nature, but a storm within the hearts of men. According to Cayce, this storm represented both a literal and spiritual reckoning. He said that, during this time, a leader, tied to towers and gold, would rise to face the chaos. At first, he would stand firm, confident in his own strength, believing he could control the forces around him. But soon, he would come to realize that this storm was far greater than him, that it was not something any man could command. We see in it a reflection of our modern times, particularly the turbulence building around the year 2026, a period that seems to carry the weight of political unrest, spiritual awakening, and environmental upheaval all at once. And yes, many believe this prophecy aligns directly with the figure of Donald Trump, the man whose name has become almost synonymous with wealth, towers, and gold. Cayce's storm wasn't just about politics or the weather, it was about the human. He said that truth would no longer belong only to the powerful, that technology, the internet, and the collective voice of ordinary people would begin to expose what was hidden. In his words, this awakening would divide humanity into two paths, those who cling to fear and those who seek understanding. He warned that this coming crisis, the one symbolized by the storm, would test not just governments, but human consciousness itself. It would ask every individual and every leader to choose what they truly serve, ego or spirit, greed or grace. Cayce said that every collapse carries within it the seed of renewal, that destruction is not the end, but the doorway to revelation. The storm, in his view, was not a punishment, but a cleansing of force meant to awaken humanity to something higher. In his later readings, Cayce spoke not of one man who would save the world, but of a collective awakening, what he called the Christ consciousness. He described it as a divine force that would rise within ordinary people during moments of despair. Not a single savior descending from the heavens, but millions of souls, choosing love over division, compassion over control. When asked when this would begin, Cayce answered, "When there is turmoil in the land of the free and confusion in the hearts of its people." Look around today at the unrest, the anger, the deep divisions tearing at the soul of America, and it's hard not to wonder if this is exactly what Cayce was talking about. He said this awakening would test every leader, especially those with the builder archetype, those who create empires, shape nations, and stand as symbols of worldly power. For such figures, the storm would not just shake their surroundings, but expose the truth of what they serve. The anger from Nature Mother, Edgar Cayce continued to warn us about the other sides. He made impressive predictions about changes in the Earth's geography. He claimed that the continents would shift and the climate would change the world in unimaginable ways. He suggested that this transformation could happen suddenly with the eruptions of Mount Etna in Italy and Mount Pelée in Martinique. Both are active volcanoes, with Etna being one of the most active in the world, having erupted recently, while Pelée had its last major eruption in 1902. One of the most critical aspects of this change would occur in Africa. Cayce predicted that the continent would split into three parts due to the formation of a massive new waterway, with the Nile River widening and the Red Sea expanding significantly. This dramatic change could even submerge the bustling city of Cairo under the sea. Asia would not escape these convulsions either. Cayce predicted changes in the geography of India, China, Japan, Korea, and the Philippines. He stated that the Pacific Ocean would advance and swallow large portions of land from the Philippines to Japan, leaving only a few remaining islands. The Korean peninsula and parts of China's coastline would also succumb to the rising seas. For India, Cayce issued a specific warning. He advised seeking refuge in the country's higher elevations due to the potential collapse of land. He believed that the Himalayas in Tibet and Nepal would offer safer refuge for Indians. Cayce also made less favorable predictions for Antarctica. He suggested that, as the ice melted, the geological structure of the region would undergo drastic transformations, affecting global climate and altering weather patterns in unpredictable ways. Despite the extreme conditions, Antarctica is home to vibrant wildlife, including penguins, seals, whales, and seabirds. The ice sheet provides essential habitats and breeding areas, protecting many species from predators and ensuring access to food. However, Edgar Cayce predicted a dramatic transformation. Antarctica would lose its ice cover and turn into a vast green expanse, perfect for agriculture. On the other hand, Cayce foresaw a less favorable fate for Australia. He predicted that floods would cover a quarter of Australia's territory, submerging cities like Adelaide. Ironically, the arid deserts like Simpson and Gibson would transform into fertile agricultural lands. New Zealand, however, would emerge unscathed and might even expand, connecting to Australia and becoming a refuge for those displaced by global convulsions. In Europe, the predictions were equally dramatic. Cayce predicted that much of northern Europe, including Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, would submerge, leaving only a fragmented archipelago of islands. The United Kingdom would also suffer, with vast areas from Scotland to the English Channel succumbing to rising sea levels. Although some highland areas, such as London and Birmingham, might remain intact, many regions would not escape the devastating changes. Ireland would be almost entirely swallowed by the ocean, leaving only the highest peaks above the waterline. For ocean enthusiasts, Cayce almost predicted an expansion of the terrestrial waters. A new sea would emerge from the merging of the Black and Baltic Seas, cutting Russia off from continental Europe and extending into Siberia. This would position Russia as Europe's granary, a fertile agricultural power. The Second Coming. Edgar Cayce's predictions about the Second Coming of Christ are among his most intriguing and controversial. Cayce, a devout Christian, believed that the return of Christ would be a pivotal event in human history, marking the end of an age of materialism and the beginning of a new era of spiritual awakening. Cayce suggested that the Second Coming would occur sometime soon. He did not give a specific date but indicated that it would happen during a period of great global upheaval and change. According to Cayce, the period preceding the Second Coming would be marked by widespread chaos, conflict, and natural disasters. He predicted wars, economic collapse, and social unrest on a global scale, as well as an increase in earthquakes, hurricanes, and other catastrophic events. Cayce believed that the global turmoil would serve as a catalyst for a profound spiritual awakening. He predicted that people would turn away from materialism and seek a deeper connection with the divine, leading to a renewed interest in spirituality and a desire for inner peace. Cayce's visions of the Second Coming described Christ returning not as a physical being, but as a spiritual presence that would manifest in the hearts and minds of people all over the world. He believed that this presence would guide humanity toward a new era of love, compassion, and unity. Cayce predicted that the Second Coming would lead to the establishment of a new world order based on spiritual principles. He envisioned a global society founded on cooperation, equality, and the recognition of the interconnectedness of all life. Cayce emphasized the importance of individual spiritual growth and transformation in preparing for the Second Coming. He believed that each person had a role to play in ushering in the new era, and that personal spiritual development was essential to the collective awakening of humanity. The root cause of all calamity. For Cayce, the catastrophe he described was not easily boxed into a single cause. Instead, he presented a compound explanation in which natural forces and human agency could act together to produce devastation on an unprecedented scale. Some passages read like straightforward geological warning, earthquakes, fault rupture, and massive land shifts, while others carry darker overtones that point to human violence, explosions in the atmosphere, and sudden heat rising from the earth. Interpreters of Cayce divide along two principal lines. One camp treats his references to explosions and heat as metaphors for volcanic activity or internal tectonic processes, reading his words as dramatic but essentially naturalistic predictions. The other camp reads those same images as veiled references to modern warfare, to weapons and phenomena that, while not named in the vocabulary of his era, suggest detonations so powerful they could disturb the planet's crust. The question is not trivial. If human technologies can indeed trigger or amplify geological events, then the moral responsibility for resulting damage shifts from fate to human hands. Cayce adds a third, foundational layer to this debate by insisting on a spiritual dimension. Calamity, in his vision, follows moral decline. He frames California as more than a region of geography. It is a moral center where pride, greed, and the cult of fame concentrated in ways that, in his view, made the land spiritually vulnerable. For Cayce, natural catastrophes are rarely neutral. They are, at least in part, responses to human choices, a sickness of civilization that manifests physically. This theological reading turns the question of cause into a summons. To change human behavior is to alter the likelihood and character of future disasters. This threefold model: natural processes, human-initiated violence, and spiritual consequence, has practical implications. If earthquakes and tsunamis are purely geological, mitigation focuses on engineering and early warning. If human-made detonations can ripple into tectonic systems, then arms control and the political choices of nations become central to prevention. If spiritual imbalance plays a causal role, then communal ethics, cultural priorities, and the ways societies cultivate humility and mutual care become part of disaster risk reduction. Cayce's synthesis forces planners and citizens to think across disciplines: geology, geopolitics, and ethics. He described the causes as intertwined, and he emphasized that human agency, especially moral choices made collectively, could either exacerbate or alleviate the risk. Pride, he taught, concentrates energy inward and upward toward self-interest. Humility disperses that concentration and refocuses communities on care. In his framework, preventing catastrophe is not merely technical work. It is cultural and spiritual labor that reshapes how people live together, use power, and steward the earth. Cayce's worry about California aligns with well-established scientific concerns. The state sits on complex, active fault systems and faces real exposure to seismic hazard and coastal change. But where science describes probabilities and timelines, Cayce described thresholds and moral meaning. Cayce's warning is therefore not just a prediction, it is an ethical diagnosis that insists on responsibility. Lifespan as human beings will be extended. We know that humans are now living longer than at the time of Edgar Cayce, but his readings seem to indicate that a healthy human lifespan would extend years beyond that which we are currently living. He once said, "Now, we find there are many changes in the body since we have had this, many for good. Many of the organs and the conditions show the changes as come about by the natural or so-called natural conditions, in changes as the body succumbs to the effects of age or usage in the system. Much of this may be overcome. Man should live much longer than has been ordinarily given, and will." While we have seen improvements in healthcare that have increased lifespans compared to Cayce's time, living for centuries remains a drastic idea. It would mean not just adding years to life, but also maintaining good health over extended periods. Cayce's vision implies that future generations might enjoy a longer and better quality of life in their later years. This could lead to changes in how societies are structured, including retirement ages and healthcare systems. The idea challenges us to think about aging not as a process of decline, but as an opportunity for continued growth and contribution to society. While Cayce's specific time frame and ways for achieving these longer lifespans remain uncertain and speculative, his vision encourages us to consider the possibilities of future medical advancements and their potential impact on human longevity. It makes us imagine a future where aging is viewed differently, with new opportunities and challenges for individuals and society as a whole. The awakening year, The year 2026, according to Cayce, marks a pivotal moment in human history. It's described as an epoch where a collective awakening occurs the world. He believed that by 2026, humanity would experience a significant spiritual awakening, leading to a deeper connection with our inner selves and a greater awareness of our interconnectedness with all living beings. This prediction resonates with the increasing interest in mindfulness, meditation, and holistic well-being practices in our modern society. As scientific and technological advancements have dominated our collective focus, many have found themselves feeling increasingly disconnected from a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. That is what Edgar Cayce saw long ago, and he believed that 2024 is the perfect time for everyone to awaken. We all need to seek out ways to reconnect with their inner selves and find greater fulfillment in life. Edgar Cayce also spoke about the awakening that people must experience after leaving this world. He told, "After death, we may enter a region that is void of love, life, and light. Void of everything. For some, this region is approximately their wish come true. Here, they are truly alone with themselves. For some souls, this is a pain that is unbearable. In the absence of truth, love, gentleness, and kindness, some souls fill the void with an irrational and unbelievable amount of pain and fear. It is so dark in the realm of outer darkness that the darkness hurts and panic grips them without knowing why. There are various degrees of darkness to this realm, and it is darker and denser at the center than at its outer fringes. The closer we are to the outer edges, the more interaction there is with others in the realm. The closer to the center, the darker and more painful is the solitude. Those who find themselves in outer darkness cannot travel across this dimension. They must grow through the levels of this realm. After death, one may find themselves in a particular degree of darkness that most closely corresponds to the degree of the absence of love in one's life. Outer darkness is not a punishment. It is a region which operates lawfully for the benefit of those who are there. This region is not a realm which was created for any soul to experience, but one which came about as a consequence of the negative activity of souls in creation. So great has been the desire for self, so monumental across time and space has been the selfishness of some of God's creatures, that this realm is the creation or manifestation of their own collective activities. Outer darkness and the reality with which it is associated were created and are held in place by collective self-interest. Being spiritually awakened means that an individual has had a profound shift in their understanding of themselves and the world around them. This awakening often comes after a period of feeling disconnected, lost, or unfulfilled in life. Interestingly, some individuals report experiencing physical symptoms, such as a fever, during their spiritual awakening, signifying a kind of intense inner burning away of old beliefs and patterns. Spiritual awakening can happen suddenly or gradually, and it often involves a change in perception, a deepening of self-awareness, and a newfound sense of connection to a higher power, even amidst internal conflict. Spiritual awakening can take many forms and can be experienced in different ways by different people. Some common signs and symptoms of spiritual awakening can include a greater sense of empathy, compassion, and love towards others, an increased ability to live in the present moment, a deeper connection to nature and the universe, a heightened awareness of synchronicities and signs, and a sense of inner peace and contentment. Ultimately, being spiritually awakened means that an individual has come to a new level of understanding and awareness about themselves and the natural world. It's through this ascension process that you realize your potential and find the ability to change your life profoundly. In other words, they've had a spiritual ascension. Now, it's important to understand the difference between awakening and ascension. While spiritual awakening refers to the internal shift in consciousness that an individual experiences, leading to a profound change in their understanding of themselves and the world, ascension, specifically 5D ascension, signifies an evolution beyond the physical reality into a realm of higher spiritual enlightenment and awareness. This spiritual ascension, often referred to as 5D ascension, signifies a shift from the three-dimensional physical reality to a five-dimensional realm of spiritual enlightenment and awareness. It often involves a newfound sense of purpose and direction in life, as well as a deepening of one's spiritual practices and beliefs. And if you have these signs, might be you are experiencing a spiritual awakening. One of the first signs of spiritual awakening is heightened intuition. Intuition is often described as an inner knowing, a subtle voice or feeling that guides us without conscious reasoning. Imagine moments when you suddenly just know the right path to take, or when you understand something without needing to analyze it. These instances become more frequent and pronounced. You might make decisions based on a feeling or a hunch, which often are remarkably accurate and beneficial. This heightened intuition keeps you in tune with your inner voice, which speaks from your true self, free from overthinking and external influences. The noise of everyday life dims, allowing you to hear the wisdom inside you all along. As you experience this shift, your intuition becomes a source of creativity and inspiration. You may discover new solutions to problems, or feel inspired to take paths you hadn't considered before. Trusting this inner guidance can be empowering, leading to a deeper understanding of yourself and your purpose. Increased empathy and compassion is the second sign. You may gain a deeper empathy and compassion as you journey through a spiritual awakening. Suddenly, the boundaries between your emotions and those of others might seem blurred, allowing you to feel what they feel with a heightened sense of understanding and sensitivity. You might genuinely experience the ebbs and flows of emotions that others are going through. This increased empathy can extend to all living beings, people, animals, and the environment. You become more at one with the subtle expressions of nature and the silent voices of animals, sensing their unspoken stories and needs. Alongside empathy, your compassion also grows. This might manifest in small acts of kindness, like offering a listening ear to a friend or helping a stranger in need. Or it could inspire more significant changes in your life, such as volunteering for causes you care about, or making lifestyle choices that are more considerate of the planet and its population. This increase in empathy and compassion is a sign of your heart opening and your consciousness expanding. You start to see the interconnectedness of all life, recognizing that the well-being of others directly impacts your own. As enriching as this heightened empathy and compassion can be, looking after yourself is important. Being deeply attuned to the emotions of others can feel overwhelming at times. Setting healthy emotional boundaries helps you maintain your emotional well-being. The next sign that you need to focus on is desire for meaningful connections. A key aspect of experiencing a spiritual awakening is the desire for deeper, more meaningful connections in your life. This shift often begins as a growing dissatisfaction with superficial interactions and a hunger for relationships that offer genuine depth and authenticity. You may find yourself longing for conversations beyond the mundane, seeking to connect on a level that nourishes your soul and aligns with your newfound understanding of the world. As you embark on this journey, the nature of your relationships may begin to change. You might gravitate towards people who share your values and perspectives, or challenge you to grow and think in new ways. You might seek out those who understand and respect your journey in your friendships, offering support and wisdom. In romantic relationships, you may desire a partner who supports and participates in your spiritual growth. Even in professional settings, you might find yourself drawn to work that feels more aligned with your values and allows for authentic expression. This shift can also mean letting go of relationships that no longer serve your growth. Recognizing that some connections might hinder your journey is an essential part of this process. It's about finding balance and ensuring that your social circle reflects and supports your spiritual path. Changing priorities is also a special sign. During a spiritual awakening, one of the most noticeable changes is your priorities and values. You might find yourself reassessing what truly matters to you, leading to a significant shift in how you view and interact with the world. You'll begin to value personal growth, meaningful relationships, and enriching experiences over material possessions. This realization can be liberating, freeing you from pursuing material gains and allowing you to focus on what genuinely enriches your life. As personal growth climbs higher on your list of priorities, you might invest more time and energy in activities that nurture your mind, body, and spirit. This could include meditation, yoga, reading, or creative hobbies. The joy in these activities often comes from the inner peace and self-discovery they bring. Relationships also take on a new significance. You value deeper connections with others that are based on mutual respect, understanding, and support. These relationships provide a sense of belonging and offer a space for mutual growth and sharing life experiences. Experiences themselves become more valuable than possessions. Travel, learning new skills, or spending quality time with loved ones might become more important. These experiences enrich your life in ways that material items cannot, providing lasting memories and a sense of fulfillment deeply rooted in living a meaningful life. Let's continue with feeling a sense of unity. A symptom often experienced during a spiritual awakening is a deep-seated feeling of unity or oneness. It connects to a larger, universal energy, being in harmony with all forms of life. You might experience moments where you feel deeply in tune with nature, sensing a sacred kinship with the trees, the sky, the ocean, and every living creature. In your interactions with people, you may recognize that everyone, regardless of their background or life story, shares the same fundamental desires for love, security, and happiness. This realization can foster empathy and compassion as you begin to see reflections of yourself in others. Judgments and barriers fade, replaced by an understanding of the universal human experience. You might also become more aware of how your actions impact the world. This awareness can lead to more mindful, conscious living, where your choices are guided by a desire to contribute positively to the collective well-being. Last but not least, it's experiencing moments of bliss. A spiritual awakening often brings with it unexpected moments of bliss and joy. These experiences can feel like bursts of pure happiness from deep within, and often occur without any apparent external cause. These moments of bliss can catch you by surprise. You might be engaged in a mundane task or sitting quietly, when suddenly overwhelmed by immense peace and happiness. This isn't the kind of joy that comes from external rewards or achievements. It feels more intrinsic, as if you're tapping into a deep well of contentment within you. This bliss is often accompanied by feeling connected to something greater than yourself. It's as if, in that moment, you're experiencing a deep truth about life and your place in the universe. These experiences can be deeply moving and transformative, offering a glimpse into being free from worry, stress, or negativity. These experiences can be incredibly rejuvenating. In the aftermath of such bliss, you might feel more energized, optimistic, and at peace with yourself and the world around you. It's a reminder of the potential for joy that resides within us all, waiting to be uncovered. A hardest crisis happened than ever. When you put Cayce's warnings together, the picture becomes uncomfortably sharp. He didn't merely sketch theoretical risks, he described a moment when America could very nearly break inward. A time when the strain of economic collapse, environmental disaster, and political polarization would push ordinary institutions to make extraordinary choices. In reading 3,976-18, he lays out a scenario in which armed factions come face to face in our own cities, and where the military, reluctantly pulled into the chaos, is forced to decide which side to support. He is careful to call this a possibility, not an inevitability, but the force of his language makes clear how close the nation could come to a hard crisis if certain choices are made and certain pressures converge. The trigger, Cayce says, is not a slow erosion but a contested action, a bold, divisive measure taken by the leader that half the country views as necessary and the other half sees as tyrannical. It is that rupture which, in his timeline, happens in 2026 and sparks a rapid escalation. Protests that swell into violent clashes, emergency measures that strain civil liberties, and deployments of troops into major urban centers, not to repel an external foe, but to restore order amid internal breakdown. Imagine the psychological shock of soldiers patrolling streets, where neighbors once met at coffee shops. This is the fork-in-the-road moment Cayce warns about, when the country must choose whether to pull back or to plunge further into chaos. Yet Cayce's prophecy does not end in despair. Intertwined with the darker passages are specific glimpses of a path through a kind of spiritual and social recovery that begins only after things have been driven to the brink. He speaks of people remembering what matters, of communities rediscovering bonds that political rhetoric had frayed, and of grassroots efforts that bridge divides because survival forces cooperation. In his view, the crisis itself functions like a furnace, raw, dangerous, and purifying, and from it can come an awakening of conscience and solidarity if enough people refuse to be swallowed by fear. Timing matters a great deal in Cayce's account. He flags the late summer to autumn window of 2026 as particularly critical, and he singles out November, the month of the midterm elections, as a defining moment. He envisions elections that are not ordinary contests over policy, but a referendum on the nature of governance itself, a moment when procedural choices will be read as existential ones. The results, he suggests, would surprise everyone. Neither party would capture the narrative they expected, and the apparent winner-loser calculus would be complicated by new alignments and shocks that reshuffle the political map. One of the more striking and hopeful threads in Cayce's readings is the appearance of what he calls the unexpected ally. This is not a conventional politician, but a healer-type figure who steps forward from outside the usual arenas of power. Their strength, Cayce implies, lies in practical problem-solving and in the ability to appeal to common human needs rather than to partisan ideology, drawing together people who had become estranged. Whether this figure is already known to the public or has yet to emerge, Cayce paints them as someone whose presence helps stabilize fractured communities and provide an alternative narrative to polarization. All of this matters because we're not reading an ancient prophecy in a vacuum. We are living in 2025, and the pieces Cayce pointed to a returning controversial leader, deeper divisions, a fraying international order, and mounting economic and environmental warning signs feel alarmingly present. That proximity is why his writings still stir debate. The readings function both as a warning and as a call to action. They ask us to notice the pressure points, to strengthen civic institutions, to refuse simplistic answers that trade liberty for the illusion of security, and to look for those practical leaders who can heal rather than inflame.